in the US was the dangers of monotheism in the age of globalization. Sorry. And the byline, so that was the dangers of monotheism in the age of globalization. And the byline was, can India's polytheism provide a moral and spiritual example to the world that the West and Islam cannot? So I wrote this article, and on that basis I was invited to share some thoughts here. And the point I made, this was before the crisis of 2008, was that the planet needs quite desperately a sense of moral order, spirituality, and an ethical compass. The Indian religious and philosophical traditions can provide a great deal of all three. And I still believe this quite strongly, although I'll come back shortly. I found out that actually some of these perspectives that I have were shared by other Westerners at earlier times. And I have a number of quotations. It was after I wrote my article that I came across a passage from Aldous Huxley, as you know, is the philosopher, author, Brave New World, who wrote, the religions whose theology is least preoccupied with events in time and most concerned with eternity have been consistently less violent and more humane in political practice. Unlike early Judaism, Christianity, and Mohammedanism, all obsessed with time, Hinduism and Buddhism have never been persecuting faiths, have preached almost no holy wars, and have refrained from proselytizing religious imperialism or conversions, which had gone hand in hand with political and economic oppression of colored people. So there was, I think there's an acceptance, if you like, that there's this other perspective. I also came across a quotation from the German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer, who said, in the whole world there is no study so beneficial and so elevating as that of the Upanishads. They are destined sooner or later to become the faith of the people. Thus the first 21st century can gain enormously from the leadership of India, spiritual leadership, philosophical leadership, drawing from the traditions. In fact, I make the point that I think if we look at the environment right now, it's pretty certain that the next global power, and I'll come back to global power in the sense of strong hard power, economic and military, will be China. I think that seems pretty irrevocable. What role does China play is going to be considerable in many respects, but I think the Chinese tradition, even including Confucianism, has difficulty in explaining the meaning of life. I think at this point the comments have been made about identity and so on, that it's from the traditions of Indian religions that they're going to be found. I also have two more quotations I want to share with you, just to show that there is a reasonable company that I'm keeping. Arnold Toynbee, whom again I presume you know, famous historian, said, "It is already becoming clear that a chapter which had a Western beginning will have to have an Indian ending, if it is not to end in self-destruction of the human race. At this supremely dangerous moment in human history, the only way of salvation to the ancient is the ancient Hindu way. Here we have the attitude and spirit can make it possible for the human race to grow together into a single family." And there's a last quotation by Mark Twain, again I'm sure everybody knows, who says, "India is the cradle of the human race, the birthplace of human speech, the mother of history, the grandmother of legend, and the great-grandmother of tradition. Our most valuable and most instructive materials in the history of man are treasured in India only." So I think this represents, in my mind, the sort of challenge that we're facing. I think, again, the comments have been made that conflict is sort of in our DNA. We've always done conflict, right? I didn't realize that we only had 250 years without it. But basically, globalization, as we call it now, has been a successive of great powers emerging and imposing their power. And if you like, in the before the 15th century, it was mainly the Muslims, mainly the Arab world, which extended from Andalusia to Indonesia. And then after the 15th century, you had the rise of the Portuguese seaborne empire. There's an extremely good documentary done by the Chinese television, CCTV. Some of you may be familiar with it. If you're not, I strongly recommend it. It's called The Rise of the Great Powers. And it came out in 2006. And was at a time when the Chinese were saying, hey, wait a second, we're becoming a great power. By great power, I don't attach moral value to it. I'm just saying great in terms of might. And they said, what has been the experience of the other great powers? And this is what this series is about. It begins, chapter 1 is with Portugal, chapter 2 is Spain, chapter 3 is the Netherlands, so the chronology, chapter 4 is the UK, chapter 5 is France, my country, chapter 6 is Germany, chapter 7 is Japan, chapter 8 is Russia, and chapter 9 is the United States. So chapter 10 presumably will be China. The Chinese are talking about their peaceful rise. We need to try and change. We have to accept, I think, as I say, that this conflict has been within the DNA. And one of the things that's interesting is that, if you like, all of these great powers, with one exception, were basically of Christian origin. Japan is the exception, although I must say that when you talk about Buddhism and Shinto, there's a difference. Buddhism is universal, Shinto is nativist. It's very much unique, and it was also, I think, if you look at Japan's rise as a great power, that Buddhism was there, but not a driving force. Shinto was the state religion. The Yasukuni Shrine is Shinto, it's not Buddhist, and so on. So I think I would insist much more on the Buddhism, which is universal, than on the Shintoism. So I think there is this potential for India to be a leader in a non-conventional sense. I think it's very important. This is a point I try to get across to my students. I teach in India, and when they say to me, when do you think we're going to take over China? I say, why do you want to do that? What's the point? You know, I think there's an obsession partly with art power, partly also with materialism. I mean, I think many Chinese friends of mine are beginning to wonder whether, was it really worth it to achieve this kind of GDP at the expense that we're having. So we need to have a sort of a new paradigm, a new thinking. I'm going to do like some of the previous speakers, since my time has been cut down, to ask you to please read the paper, which is rather long, but I'm only going to take a few extracts from it. And I was inspired in my thinking of non-conventional soft power, spiritual, moral, civilizational. Of course, the point has been made, the thing I said in the article, that if you're in a monotheistic faith, you say, there's one God, and it's my God. And if you don't agree, I'll kill you, or you convert. So that has been the driving force, and I think the point that was made about ideology and dogmatism have been present in religion. Now there's this new perspective possible of India as a global civilization power, not as a global military or economic power. And I think that Vivekananda, as far as I know him, can be a tremendous inspiration for this. I chose in the paper 2 quotations from Vivekananda, which I use as the basis of my argument. The first quotation from Vivekananda, Swami Vivekananda, is, all differences in this world are of degree and not of kind, because oneness is the secret of everything. Now, it's a secret that's very elusive, and I think the point has been made is that what we're seeing is much more confrontation, much more division, much more, and everywhere. I mean, I take the point, of course, that right now, to a considerable extent, Islam is in the hot seat, so far as ethnic cleansing and so on is concerned. But even here, one has to say that there's the plight of the Rohingyas in Myanmar and so on. So somehow or other, we've got to get to this oneness on the basis. The other thing, and this is what most of my paper is about, actually, but I'm not going to talk very much about it. The other quotation I really like from Vivekananda, and I use a lot, is saying, it is impossible to think about the welfare of the world unless the condition of women is improved. It is impossible for a bird to fly on only one wing. And if I could make... Thank you. If I could make one comment, is that there are not many wings of the female kind in this room. And so next time I come to a conference in the Vivekananda National Foundation, I hope there will be a bit more balance, because otherwise you fly like this. And I think it's also true that men are given more to violence. This is not to say that women are immune from it, but one of the points I made very strongly also, because we could be at one level be practical. The point that I made very strongly in this article that I wrote is taking Vivekananda's words, and let's have a movement to abolish rape. Conflict is between men, but it's usually women that suffer the most. And something that I discovered, I've been a feminist for most of my adult life. But something I've discovered, and of course I'm ashamed as a man, that we seem to treat this